Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Subcommittee. My name is Kalila Perry, the committee clerk. Please note that the public element of this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and those participating in the meeting have given consent to their inclusion. The recording will be uploaded to the City Corporation's website for up to 1 civic year. I'll now hand over to the chairman.
Great, thank you very much, Town Clerk, and welcome to this subcommittee. I'd also like to welcome members of the subcommittee and Leila Osterbo, a member of the corporation who's joining us today. We've got a few items for information. We've got an expansion from City Police, which we're looking forward to, and I think a fairly interesting afternoon ahead. So without further ado, Town Clerk, do we have apologies?
Yes. In advance of this meeting, I've received apologies from the Deputy Chair, Patrick Fowler and Umani Smallwood.
Marvelous, thank you. And any declarations?
Any declarations, members? No, thank you.
Marvelous. In that case, we'll move on to the minutes of our last meeting from the 1st of October last year. Town Clerk, we have, I think, these between pages 5 and 10. We need to approve them, but I'll begin with any matters arising, I think, before we do. Page 5, page 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. Members, are you content that they're factually accurate? I think those nods suffice. So thank you, Town Clerk. Those minutes are approved. City Police now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nikki Gander, Chief Inspector from City of London Police. In my previous role, I was the Chief Inspector for Neighbourhoods Policing, which includes licensing, the ward officers, what was then called partnerships team, and proactive element of the local neighbourhoods team. The work that I'm going to present today started in that role, and for the benefit of consistency, I have kept hold of that moving into the role that I'm now in, which conveniently it also fits into that. So at the moment I'm the hotspots and problem orientated policing lead for the city. We have had a budget from the Home Office for the last 2 years to target hotspots that involve serious violence, antisocial behaviour and various other crime types. One of the elements that we have chosen as a hotspot policing topic is rough sleeping and homelessness in the city, which includes begging, and how we've gone about dealing with that. So the work that I started in that neighbourhoods role has actually kind of morphed into the role that I'm now in as the hotspots lead. Some of you may have seen this before. This is a slightly pared back version because I think some people are quite aware of the work that we've been doing with the joint working group. I'm just going to try and share my screen, which hopefully is going to work. I did. Bear with me. I am in the meeting. Show me the email. Okay. And window. It's in PowerPoint. There you go. Okay. Thank you. Let's just get back to the notes on the page again. Okay. Okay, so just a bit of background. Back in May and June 2024, there were various referrals into the Community Marek for the city that highlighted concerns around 2 particular encampments, one at Peninsula House and one at Castle Baynard Street. The people involved in the Marek meeting put together an initial multi-agency response to those situations. And there were some one-off activity days which very much focused around a kind of clean up and remove things that were no longer wanted, some engagement with the rough sleepers that were present, and it had an effect for a period of time. Over that summer, the work that was done was then completed, and by September time there was no ongoing work. So the areas had been cleaned up, tents had been removed that were abandoned, and there'd been some engagement. In September, we had a really concerning incident where we had a knife crime at Castle Baynard Street, which led to all of the rough sleepers in that area being temporarily housed due to the fact that the area had become a crime scene. And what it highlighted was some really strong partnerships, some really good partnership working, some trusting, confident relationships, and the ability to mobilise in the event of a crisis in this situation. Looking at it post-incident, what I became aware of was that we really lacked a consistent partnership approach in preventing those sort of incidents from occurring or escalating, or identifying the risk early enough to be able to deal with them. Myself and Simon Cribbins got together and identified that there was also a lack of kind of protocol policy that allowed us to work and set a framework for us within that area. So the next piece of work that we looked at was kind of in partnership. Simon looked very much from a process protocol policy position, and wrote the tackling the negative impact of rough sleeping policy, whilst I looked at how we could use police resources together with partners to actually have a consistent forum in order to discuss risk and to determine what the priorities were that we needed to work on. Due to those two pieces of work, myself, Simon, together with Will and Kirsty, who I met through this forum, came together and actually started looking at what would be the most suitable way to approach this. It wasn't something that was suitable to just keep discussing within the MARAC. So we agreed that coming out of the MARAC, we would put a problem-solving team together, which we called the Joint Working Group. Joint aim, no surprises to anybody, was to work in partnership and make the city a safe place to live, work and visit for everyone. So we formed the Joint Working Group over the first meeting was in December 2024. This December just gone was the 12-month anniversary of that, and looking back at it, there's been a huge amount of changes. So I just wanted to really touch on some of the things that we've done over the last it's just more than a year now. But some of the things that we've done, some of the things that we have identified, and some of the processes that we've put in place. I will go on to have a very quick look at some of the examples of the work that we've done, so that it hopefully puts it into context with it's not, we were very clear right at the beginning, we didn't want just a talking shop where we all go and talk about it. We wanted to have people in that meeting who could make decisions, who could translate that into resources on the ground, doing things that prevent risk, that prevent demand, reduce demand, and safeguard people. So the monthly meetings that we started having had the right people there, people who could make decisions, people who could commission resources, and essentially prioritise the risks that we were seeing on the streets on a daily basis. So each member would bring an update based on the people they were working with, who were interacting with the rough sleepers, all members of the public that were bringing concerns to us about rough sleepers. And through that meeting, we were able to gather all of those updates, and then as a group prioritise which areas we wanted to work on over the following month, who should lead on it, and what our aim should be at the end of the day with that particular problem. Through doing that month on month, and I think one of the things that I've seen as success is the consistency of that group. It's continued every month. We've had a really good membership, and we've had the right people there. Even when we've seen changes to members of staff in different roles, the next person has been brought along, there's been a handover, and there's been a really good knowledge of who we've got in the room and what their role is as part of the Joint Working Group. So some of the successes of that, so the impact after that first year that we've looked at, is that consistency, that preventative approach, that risk assessment and early identification of things that we think are going to become a demand, sharing information, and essentially reducing the risk, reducing demand, and finding some shorter routes off the street for people in terms of safeguarding temporary accommodation, and making sure they're working with the right partner to be able to get the best outcomes. So this is a real snapshot, really. We have some real core members of the group who turn up every time and who are involved in the work week in, week out. We also have occasionally guests who might be part of one specific problem or the service that's going to reduce the problem. But I think just the number of people that we've had involved in the group over that year is testament to how strongly everybody feels about making sure that we are together, shoulder to shoulder, making sure that we've got the right people in the room to make decisions to make a difference on the streets of the city. And you've got everything there from statutory, voluntary, businesses, different parts of the corporation, different elements of local policing, elected members, bids, all sorts of people have come along and played a part in that over the year in different ways. So just to kind of show people really what part of one of the problems. So this is an aerial view of Castle Baynard area. The big yellow bit in the middle, you can see we've got an encampment within the tunnel. For anybody that's not been there, it's a significantly wide tunnel. It's long. It's a cycle superhighway. There's very little other traffic that goes in and out of there, and there's a really wide pavement on one side of it, which is perfect for people to pitch a tent and have a little bit of heat from some of the heating ducts that are coming out of the building. There's very little foot traffic, so they feel safer in that location. And it's protected from the elements. So it is if you're going to camp somewhere in the city, that's a really good option for people. Not such a good option for some of the surrounding areas. We've got a second encampment in White Lion Hill subway, so top right hand side there. And the purpose of showing this particular area is because it's one of the things that we've really focused on in terms of problem solving, identifying risk, and then working on that problem. On the bottom right, you can see the City of London School, and handily at the top of the page, you can see the school coaches, which Google really conveniently captured for me on this shot, by the Faraday building. Those coaches are there every day to take up to 300 pupils from the City of London School to external sports venues where they go and have their sports, swimming and various other activities during the day. White Lion Hill Tunnel, the subway there, is what connects the children under the road to the coaches. But because we've had an encampment of 3 or 4 tents in that area, the children and the teachers have been using the road instead, which for me presented a really clear risk to the local community. It was impacting on them, their wellbeing and the risk to them. So as a group, we set that as a priority. We've taken legal advice, we've had corporation legal lead involved, and we have got a plan. We have cleared the subway of tents on several occasions, and at the moment we're working on a solution to prevent people coming back and to take really swift 24-hour action to be able to prevent them when they do go and camp in that area. Together with the outreach team, the messaging is starting to get through. We're not reliant wholly on enforcement and police officers going down there day in, day out, because actually the education awareness piece that the outreach workers is doing is kind of moving people away from that and making it a less attractive option, because they can't just stay there for a long period of time. So the interactions that we've had with the people that have been sleeping there has been long-term and ongoing, offering alternatives and pushing that. But with the enforcement sat behind it, that at some point we are going to take action and make you move. So it's that joint kind of approach with the welfare together with the enforcement, which is what some people need sometimes to push them towards that option.
Sophia.
Right. If you're then moving people from there, you're under Blackfriars Bridge now. That's obviously now been reopened, and there's a new garden area and all the rest of it. Are you a bit concerned that people are going to start camping under there, because that again is protected from the elements, and before they did all the works there, people were camping there?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's something that I come on to just at the end of the presentation. Just moving people isn't what we want to be doing. So that's where the outreach workers and the rest of the partnership come in, to actually make sure that there's other options on the page than just move somewhere else. We don't want to be moving the problem around, which is why we take so long to actually engage with people, have the right people doing the engagement, which isn't police officers, that's the outreach workers, the navigators and the people who have got the skills, relationship and the trust, and actually the options for temporary accommodation to move into. That's our ultimate goal. We know that that's not always going to happen, but my kind of tagline for all of this is it's a really complex situation and we're never going to get it right every time. But as a consortium of people, we're trying to move together in the best way for the benefit of the people that are rough sleeping, together with the local communities that then impacts on. And the last thing that we want to do is move somebody from somewhere they're not having an impact or it's little impact to somewhere where they're having a great impact. And that's at the forefront of everything that we do. We don't want to make any of the problems worse, either for the rough sleepers or the local community. So it's a real balance. I'm not sure we always get it right. Sometimes we don't have control over that, but our plan is actually to try and make sure that we look at long-term sustainable solutions for people and not just lift and shift somewhere else.
Really sorry, I've got to run to another meeting, but just on that topic, I just want to say, firstly, professional and personal experience tells me a really good job is being done in all of these areas in the city. So please don't take what comes next as any real criticism, because I really genuinely mean that. But one of the outcomes on the examples that you've given is the CBO banning from the City of London. And generally speaking, as somebody that's represented people both sides of those applications, I think it's a really poor outcome. I think banning people from the city is moving the problem somewhere else, and the reality is, for most of the people we're talking about, the entrenched and challenging behaviour is not because they're in this square mile necessarily. It's going to persist wherever they go. And so, yeah, I know that will be considered by everybody, and I know that we have those arguments in courts, but for me to see that, I think that's a really poor outcome. And so when it was heralded as an example of a good outcome, I just sort of bristled a little bit, because, yeah, it's a good outcome for the City of London. But I wonder if we can think a bit more. Well, I know we do think generally more holistically than that.
Yeah.
But it just scares me when I see us going to court saying we don't want this man in the city, ban him.
So to reassure you,
yeah.
Some of the learning that we've had from the last year is exactly that. We went into this. I've been very much guided by like Will and Kirsty, the outreach team, and we've moved very much away from a position where we would do a citywide ban. We try to make sure that every time we look at enforcement options, we have consulted with outreach in particular to say what could we do here, and we now look at really specific restrictions on people so that we don't move them out of where outreach can find them. We don't move them away from a supportive environment. We make sure that they can still be found by the people that are engaging with them and offering that support. So it's one of the key pieces of learning that we've got this year. It's not something that police officers would think of, but that's the benefit. And for me, the next CBO won't be a complete citywide ban. I'm not saying there would never be an opportunity, a reason for that, but it's not our go-to position, and we would need to justify that to be able to go forward and say the reason for a citywide ban is very specific. So it was also something that came up in one of the safeguarding adult reviews in the SAR. That was a really specific point that was mentioned that we took on board and made sure the training that's going out now to officers that are delivering CPW, CPN and then moving forward to CBOs is very much about the minimum requirement to achieve the outcome that we're looking for that location or that individual. So
yeah, perfect.
That's great. The last slide.
That's really good. Great. Thank you, the chair, for giving me that.
So Helen.
Yeah, I think it's just reminding ourselves that and you mentioned the policy that you and Simon worked on, tackling the negative impacts of sleeping. That was always in the context of welfare first, and so just shifting people out of the city is not welfare first. And it's just, we need to remember that is what every approach, contact, the conversation that the team have comes with that as the first principle.
And that's certainly what's built into all the. I mean, we've had quite I think it was Sam or it might be Josie. We've had quite an extensive conversation recently where we thought that somebody had a restriction on them that banned them from a certain area, and actually going back and doing the research, police officers had consulted with outreach. There'd been a conversation about it, and the outcome that we got, although it's not what we would have wanted, we've identified where that went wrong and what it should have been. So we're getting there. It's still a work in progress, and it's certainly the aim is to make sure it's welfare first approach. A complete banning order on the city is not something that I would condone unless we really have got the evidence to prove it. And it's also the approach. So a lot of the time the complaints that come through to me have come either via members or boards or police authority board in particular, and the response going back from chair of police authority board is very much quoting the policy and the fact that it's welfare first, and the whole kind of, you know, lift from here and put somewhere else isn't what we want to do. It doesn't help anybody, it just moves the problem. So yeah, very much on the same page. So just some kind of visual elements, just put it in context for people. This was Castle Baynard Street Tunnel. We still go down there regularly and remove things that are fire risks, fire hazards, waste food, anything that's no longer used, that's abandoned. We work together with Outreach to make sure we're not taking away people's belongings. We have storage that we make sure is used, and we, you know, leave messages for people to say we've left it. If we're in any doubt whatsoever, then we'll leave it and play safe and ask Outreach to go and do that engagement for us. White Lion Hill subway, this was really illustrates how difficult it was for the children and school users to use that tunnel, and why we focused our efforts on White Lion Hill subway. It's still a work in progress. It's complex, we haven't got the answers, but we are working together to actually push forward into those spaces and work out what the right solutions are for those problems, and that takes into consideration everybody's risks and needs in those areas. Peninsula House. Peninsula House was the first of the Marrick referrals that we got, and the area was completely and utterly, it was in a terrible state. It was a health and safety risk. There were rodents, there was all sorts of rubbish and waste. The compliance, if that's the right word, of the people that are now rough sleeping there and bedding down is completely different. We get a huge amount of kind of voluntary compliance from people, where they will gather their rubbish together, they will remove stuff that's waste. Again, it's a work in progress, but it's working towards a safer environment and providing that basis for the future engagement that would hopefully lead people to longer term solutions. So just a real kind of round robin. They're really complex, very different, broad examples of the areas that we've worked in. And as the gentleman that left alluded to, some of these were seen as success at the time. We've had learning from all of these. There is success in all of them, but there's learning to take from everything. Would we do everything the same again? Probably not, but that's part of that evolution of the joint working group and the partnership and the changing requirements, the needs and the demands on all of the people that are within that group. So just the kind of outcome at the end of that first year, myself and Phil Connor, as the head of community safety, have reviewed the work over the last year. We've looked at learning. We've actually come away with quite a big list of actions for us to go and review different things, change some of the policies that we work on. And I think that the overriding feeling from those involved in it is that it's a really good example of partnership working. I think we're aware of our limitations and our, you know, where we want to go and what challenges we might have over the next kind of 1 to 3 years within that, but it's definitely put us in a far better position in terms of assessing risk, understanding risk, and putting mitigation for those risks in place. We've got evidence of, and I think it's in the pack, there's a chart, like an appendix at the end of the written version of this, which just kind of highlights some of the areas that we've worked in that go from the very, you know, high level safeguarding to actually using very low level CPWs to get people to change their behaviour and understand that's consequences for them, but there's also support there if they want to take it. So I think overall for me, the success is not necessarily the numbers and the statistics and how many people did you get to do this and how many moved from here to there, how many tickets did you give out. The success for me is the strength of the partnership, the trust that we have with each other, the difficult conversations that we can have about what's gone well and what hasn't, and the learning that comes from it. The fact that we have that forum where we talk about risk, We identify who's going to lead on it, what activity, and we don't always agree. We will have extreme ends of the conversation happening and a position in the middle, but we will agree, identify who will lead on it, and identify who's supporting, so that everybody is kept safe through that. And I think probably the bit for me, and we're a superstitious lot in policing. There's certain words we don't like to say out loud, and certain concepts we don't like to talk about in case it happens. But given the significant increased risk of serious harm to people who live on the streets, I think it's just worth thinking about the things that haven't happened in the time since that stabbing in September last year before. So the things that haven't happened, and it's not because we haven't had people who are at risk of committing those crimes or being victim of them. They have been there, but we've been aware of it. We've worked together with the right partners and taken the right action, which I see as a huge success, that the level of incidents we've had in any of those encampments has not been where some of us were concerned it was going to. And last slide, these were just some of these are a little bit out of date now. So the review has taken place. So just some sort of intentions for next steps. The review has taken place. The big news out of that is that Phil Connor has now taken over chairship of that, with me as his deputy for the next probably 3 to 4 months, to just embed that consistency, give him some support. Home Office haven't given us any more hotspots funding, so I will be in the market for a new job in the next couple of months. So whoever there won't be a new me, it will fall to the neighbourhood's chief inspector again to pick this up and support Phil as the deputy chair. Most of the review work is complete, and we will at some point have a report that we'll share with members with regard to the outcomes of that. Operational priorities for us, White Lion Hill subway is still something that we really want to work on and make sure that's a safe environment, and we've got a really quick response to new encampments in that area. City Gardens depot, right on the edge of Castle Baynard Street, they suffer from problems not just in that location but actually around the city where they go. We've got some rebuilding of confidence and trust to do with the operatives from City Gardens depot, and we're also starting to look at practical prevention of encampment. So where we do get people to move on to suitable accommodation, temporary accommodation, actually we need to do something to stop that space being filled by somebody else moving into it.
Chief Inspector, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, that's the last slide. So
Marvellous. Thank you very much, Sophia.
So I just wanted to ask again, I have spoken to you about this before, but Fruiterer's Passage.
Yep.
Constantly there are people in that, and I know you guys are doing an amazing job in the outreach teams as well. But bearing in mind, we're talking about the passageway that the City of London Boys School wants to use that they can't use at the moment. The city walkway is for residents, tourists, workers, and and I live in Queen High Broad. I walk along there, walk to work, walk along there at weekends. There's always someone in there, if not 1 or 2 or 3 people, and it's not really on a aesthetic point of view. That's not the impression the city wants to be giving externally. We obviously want to safeguard these people, offer them the right accommodation, etc., etc. But it just seems to be an ongoing issue. Particularly, I know you guys are concentrating on encampments, but it's a smaller sort of area.
Yeah.
Is there anything more done there, please?
So it is on the list for joint working group. It is in the top part of the list of things that we do, and there are activities that are ongoing there to mitigate risk, to make sure the area is clean and hygienic and tidy.
Sometimes as a woman walking back from work, I choose to walk along Upper Thames Street rather than go along the river when it's dark, because I feel unsafe there.
Absolutely. I would say keep on giving us the information, keep reporting it either into myself, Phil, Barbara Daniels, the ASB coordinator. Things that come up more regularly and are raised with us are raised on we have a chat forum within Teams. Issues that are raised with us are shared on there, and people will then pick it up and lead on it. So we do know about it. We are working on it. If it gets, you need to keep us up to date with, is it getting worse? Are there more people there? Has there been any incidents? Because that essentially is how we assess the risk of it. If you're not feeling safe, we need to know. That's just as important as an incident happening at the location. So keep feeding that into us. We are, we do prioritise within that meeting, and it is up there. We have looked at small encampments for, so Steelyard Passage, one of the examples there. Yeah, so there was violent incidents happening there. There was businesses that were being affected by it, members of the public who were being, victim of behaviour that was unacceptable. So, there was real risk of physical harm present at that point, as opposed to perceived or feared. And with for the limited resources that we've got, we have to go with the highest risk areas. But by all means, and that would be my encouragement to everybody, the more reporting we get from people who tell us how it is, the higher that puts it on our radar for us to prioritise.
Thank you, Sophia. Helen, and then.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for everyone that's worked for this success story. But there's a concern about a known individual rough sleeper around Castle Bernard ward that is causing distress to residents, because we always have email particular couple that's we say that when you come back from work, wherever it is, it's literally there and messing out the area. So many times, my fellow councillor from Castle Bernard, they've called officers to come and clean the area in the evening. But again, as soon as they clean it, it's back there again. So my question is that, is there any criteria they could assign someone to this particular case for this particular individual?
If we can go on first.
I'm happy to take that. Yeah. So although obviously we're limited in how much detail we can share, that the likelihood is that anyone that's been rough sleeping for a period of time at Castle Baynard or any of the hotspots that we're talking about today, and some of the smaller ones as well, those individuals will be known by commission services like the City Outreach team, the Navigator team, and what you're suggesting, the idea of having someone dedicated to try and work with that individual, but also while also managing risk, it is very likely that person is allocated to someone. So to reassure you that is happening, but appreciate visually if that individual is still there and behaviour still continues, you're left questioning whether what's happening behind the scenes. But to reassure you, most, if not all, those that are consistently rough sleeping at Castle Baynard and other sites will have an allocated specialist worker.
Helen, sorry, your microphone.
The area that is actually bedding down is Bright Street, and St. Dunstan's Court, which is particular that resident is a known rough sleeper, St. Dunstan Court.
Might I suggest, just in case we're straying into anything that could become highly sensitive about individuals, which it doesn't seem to be yet, could we maybe ask any members with such specific questions to take them to Kirsty and Will's team by email afterwards? Would that be agreeable?
Yeah, thank you. That's absolutely fine.
Great. Thank you, Dawn.
Sorry, thank you. Mine was a bit more specific as well, back to the Golden Lane person sleeping in the lift. Obviously, they're able to access the blocks. However, it might be the doors are broken. When it's been reported before, I was told that the outreach teams haven't been able to access the blocks themselves in order to go in and then speak to the person. Obviously, they're sleeping in the lift, and it's quite unnerving when you go to use that lift and there's someone there taking drugs. That's particularly.
So we have actually spoken via email. I'm Sam, one of the office sleeping coordinators. So that was an issue with access to the building. Yeah. That's now been arranged. As of this morning, I've had confirmation that the outreach team have a master fob. Yeah. So they are now able to attend and try to engage with anyone that they see bedded down in that area.
That's great, because prior to this, we relied heavily on park guard. I know the member of staff has changed. I don't believe, I'm assuming the service is still the same and the service offer, but I think the other previous person went out of their way to be on top of the situation. And I'd like to think that that's probably still in place.
So I have oversight of park guard team, so I can feed that back if it's something that we can discuss outside of the meeting, but they are still attending. It's just I will have a look at the visits that they were doing previously when it was James to what they're doing now and see if we can work out what's changed. Yeah.
Thank you both, Chief Inspector.
Thank you. And just coincidentally, the meeting that I was in beforehand was with Park Guard, and they are there at Golden Lane this afternoon. And that's so one of the successes that we've had was due to Park Guard and Golden Lane and the person in the elevator. So it's just, you know, like I said at the beginning, it's complex, and I'm quite an optimistic person, but realistically, it's not a problem that we're going to solve quick time. It just takes that partnership and that continual communication, and, you know, little steps forward, re-education, and, you know, the successes mount up and make a better situation. So Golden Lane, we have had an element of success, and yeah, Park Guard are there right now.
I think one of the important things to note is that we do try to remind through the various WhatsApp groups residents to report it to the police and also to StreetLink, so that both, and I know it could be a bit of a chore to some people, but, you know, I think they're quite good at doing that, so people are sort of understanding what they should do.
Great, thank you, Dawn. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I think I've got 3 points, but sometimes in these reports the same thing comes out, so we can take it at a different time perhaps. I mean, first one is your nice pretty hexagonals. What strikes me as missing is TfL, and we did have quite again, I don't want to get too parochial about it, but the steps leading up from the Barbican Tube to the Barbican High Walks, there was a particular issue there which went on for a number of weeks with drug paraphernalia left on the steps. Obviously there had been some fires there, and I think there was confusion about whose responsibility all that was. So I suppose it's about that issue, but it's also about why TfL aren't engaged in your partnership. And then I just, and also all the sort of good work you're doing. When we come to ASB, I just think maybe we should explore, I mean, not now, but at a different time, about what ASB is, because begging, it depends. I mean, there's somebody who stands outside Tesco's near Barbican Tube, been there for years. Don't think anybody has got any problems with him at all. So it does depend what type of begging. That's just one example. And then there's things like urination, which of course probably is caused more by people that aren't rough sleeping at all in the city. And then the last thing I wanted to explore was who's living at Castle Baynard Street at the moment. I cycled through there this morning. There's 21 tents there. Everything's calm. But again, something I've raised before is, to what extent should we enable people to live there safely? And have we got things in place that make that, okay? And what do we, what is our view about that? Because I suppose if we put more stuff there, we might get more people there. If we put less stuff there, it becomes more dangerous in terms of possibly fire settings. So I think there's a whole range of issues about Castle Baynard Street in particular. I mean, I suppose what I think I've heard is that there are people that are living there that are working in the city, can't afford to live anywhere else. So I think it's quite a challenge for us about whether that's something that we should be supporting, and how much should we support that. So I think it is quite, I'm sure you as officers have had lots of conversations about that. But it does seem something that maybe we as a subcommittee should explore. Again, maybe not under this item, and maybe not today, but at some point just be clear about what our policy is around Castle Baynard Street. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Chief Inspector.
Thank you. So a couple of things. You have to remind me if I forget any of the questions. I haven't got answers for all of them. Go back to the TfL. So we're engaged with TfL. So that's one of the things that Barbara Daniels, the ASB coordinator, has picked up and is starting to work with TfL. But also Network Rail for our mainline stations, and British Transport Police as well. So that is a work in progress that she's picked up at the moment and is pushing forwards with. It is something that comes up regularly, Blackfriars, Barbican. So we know that that's an area that we want to move into. So that is part of the plan. Next part was
just about the levels of ASB.
So with the ASB, obviously you've got a criminal definition, a legislative definition for ASB, which is what we go by recording it on. Specifically with the begging, we we've got to be really careful begging at the moment. The government are about to take the old Vagrancy Act out of commission, and it's about time. It's, you know, hundreds of years old. We don't want to criminalise people for you know, begging so that they've got food, shelter, accommodation, whatever. So we do take a phased approach to begging with the Opluscum operation, which is a phased approach. It starts with the CPWs, the community protection warnings, and it makes people aware of the fact that they might be causing harassment, alarm or distress to members of the public. We don't take that forward to more punitive measures unless we can prove that they are actually causing harassment, alarm or distress, which was why we've just changed the whole system with Opluscum, which I think is the first part of the update in the pack. Because it was too punitive, and we weren't taking account of the fact that to issue the CPW and go down that route, we actually need to prove the harassment, alarm or distress, whereas with the old begging under Vagrancy Act, you just need to prove that somebody's sitting on the floor making it look like they might want something from you. It's that basic. So we're quite careful how we approach that and when we would move to any sort of punitive measures. Everything we do in that space, again, is welfare first. We do 3 referrals before we would move to a court position. And it doesn't happen very often. So, and then with respect to who is in Castle Baynard Street, it's a really good question. Actually, it's come up in the review that Phil and I have undertaken, and is one of the actions that we want to take forward, working together with Outreach and other partners, is to actually establish what is the demographic of people there who are genuinely homeless and haven't got a home to go to, and who are sleeping there because it's convenient and saves money travelling in and out of London every day. We've had instances where we've had a shared tent being used by 3 or 4 delivery drivers, which we took action with that. But that's something that, you know, every now and again kind of creeps back, that we want to be really careful that we're delivering services to people who are genuinely homeless and need those services. And actually, we're holding people to account for coming and sleeping on the street in what looks like a safe-ish place, and you know, adding to that and social behaviour community impact of a rough sleeping encampment. So we are aware of it and alive to the risks in it. The surveying and identifying who is there and what their needs are is really key to us actually making sure that we've got the right service provision and that we've got the enforcement pitched at the right place as well. So yeah, we're aware of it. There's a plan. If anybody's got more ideas that they want to add to that, then we're more than happy to have people's, you know, suggestions, feedback. Anyone that's worked in that environment elsewhere where they've seen the surveying work, then we're more than happy to take that.
Great, thank you, Chief Inspector. I think if members are content, we can move on to the next item. But before we do, thank you very much for the context, the information. Clearly, it's a massive issue to try and address, and it will depend on reporting from members of the public. But you know, you've demonstrated shared values, you've brought together a broad community, and you've gone deep. We look forward to receiving your update when you've undertaken the review and published it. So thank you very much, Chief Inspector. Will, I think the next item is with Kirsty.
Hi everyone. I'm introducing the annual Rough Sleeping Snapshot 2025 report on behalf of the author, Sam, who is part of my team, the Rough Sleeping team. In summary, the count took place on the 28th of October into the early hours of the 29th of last year, and a total of 83 individuals were seen rough sleeping in the square mile. This is a slight reduction on last year's figure of 86. Our methodology this year was our preferred. That's a count-based estimate, which involves walking all streets and open spaces within the local authority, rather than last year's approach of a lighter physical count alongside data gathering. Comparisons of other local authorities currently are limited until official numbers are announced by the MHCLG. However, there is some demographic information to consider in the report. Key takeaways are women seen rough sleeping on the night were low. This reflects known intel around women's behaviour when homeless. Non-EU other world nationalities is the second highest category behind UK nationals. Again, this is very much in line with London and the wider data picture. And also to draw your attention to on the night, we saw 14 target priority group individuals. 10 of those were city connected, 2 were Camden and 2 Westminster. A large portion of the 83 individuals were completely new to rough sleeping in the city. 35% not seen again after the count. Another consistent characteristic of those that rough sleep in the city, very transient, limited opportunity to often identify or do some sort of progressive work around who they are and what their needs are. And finally, on review of individuals' location at the point that the report was written, the majority of individuals located is unknown at this point, or remain rough sleeping. Support services have assisted a total of 18 people into accommodation, 1 international reconnection. Happy to take questions myself or Sam.
Great, thank you, Kirsty and Sam, for producing this. So numbers reasonably where they were last year, even if individuals are different. Members, you've heard the presentation. Sophia.
I took part in the count actually with Dawn.
Yes, thank you for that.
I know, and it was eye-opening. But what I would like to say is, I mean, obviously at the beginning of the report, you go, well, there's a 3% decrease from last year, but we're just basing it on one night of counting.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand we were talking about this before the meeting, that this is a national count and it's only one done a year, but could we not as a city do more than one of these street by streets, maybe 4 times a year, so we actually have more data? Because yeah, okay, so you go, well, that particular day, the next time we went back to see if that individual was there, they weren't there, whatever. I don't know, I think a more consistent counting thing would be good.
I'll take that now. Yeah.
Members, any other questions? It might be an idea to take a few. Dawn.
Thank you. I took part as well. Just to say, I admire the work of the outreach team. It was a real eye opener. And one of the people that we came across, I'm hoping, was that a North American person that came, because we had a chat with that person, and it's really great to hear that they've been supported in going back. One of my observations were that individuals are asked to attend the office, which is based here, the Guildhall. And I'm sure it just feels uncomfortable to ask them to walk into a place where it's business. And I don't know what the answer is. It's just the more and more I spoke to the outreach team worker, and the more people that we met, it just feels really uncomfortable. And is there a solution that we could look at, so that if they did need to speak to the team or come in and, I don't know, top up their phone card, I don't know, whatever it is, you know, there's another hub that they could go to, would be fantastic. Another observation was, do we work with concierges and, for instance, security guards? Because a lot of people are sleeping in the doorways to the back of offices. Do we work with them so that they know how to report people? Because it's that sort of nighttime element when it's dark and quiet, and there's just perhaps a concierge sitting at a desk. We came across quite a few instances of that. And my other thing was to do with TfL and the Blackfriars area. So, but you've addressed that already. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Dawn.
Okay, so I'll tackle, Sophia, your question first. So within the report, we share information with the regular audit. We call them audit shifts, and what that is a scaled back street count. And obviously we've acknowledged in the report that the variation in numbers doesn't sit quite right, and what we want to work better towards is a true representation of that nightly figure throughout the year, not what can feel like a sort of build up to the annual street number. So that's something that we tackled with the outreach team straight after the count in October. We're very confident that we're going to work in a different sort of methodology where we have to rely on data, because the capacity to do an annual street shift every month is not within our capability.
Not every month, but maybe every quarter. And, you know, I'd happily volunteer 4 times a year.
Well, you stole my line. Yeah, we're doing it. We're going to do it each quarter. So that's the aim. It's going to start in April. And we will manage that as best we can. And to be perfectly frank, we will need to rely on volunteers, because the capacity of the outreach team, you know, it in effect takes the whole team out for that following day and sometimes the weekend. So hopefully that satisfies and thank you very much for your offer. I think we'll be taking you up on that. So thank you. Right. So did you want to?
Yes.
So I'll just comment on the fact that we already commissioned a service, which is new in that respect. I think we feel very strongly as a team that needing a building-based service within the city would be ideal, where we could signpost individuals where it was trauma informed, that the idea of stepping into that building wasn't intimidating for our rough sleeping population. I think it has been a conversation that's been ruminated within this subcommittee and the committee for many years. However, to reassure you, earlier this year we did commission a role specifically at the Dello Day Centre, which is in Tower Hamlets, which is of all the things that we would love to have to some extent here. However, it's not far at all. It's a 15-minute walk to the Dello Centre. We have a commissioned worker that will meet those individuals on the day, do an assessment, link them into services. There's health provision there. There's the outreach team that are now based there for 2 days a week. So we're trying to tackle that aspect. It's still early days, and it's about the messaging to get that to clients and encourage them. It's not about us relocating them. It's just having a space where we can do some proper work. Well, the commission services can. Was there anything you wanted to add, Sam, about that?
It was just to say, to add on, so yes, we have outreach based there 2 days a week, but it's also the outreach team have been encouraging their clients to meet them elsewhere in the community, so libraries and other places where they find less intimidating. That's a direct quote from a client, finding Guildhall intimidating, and that's the feedback we took on board, so that they then feel comfortable to come and engage with their workers and work towards their move on plan. In terms of StreetLink, we are constantly encouraging the use of StreetLink, and maybe that's something we can take outside of this, is how we promote that use further within the communities, that more members of the community are understanding what StreetLink is, how they can use it, and then what they can do to support those that they find bedded down.
It's definitely a worthy suggestion, and we've talked for a while now about building that relationship with businesses, being more connected, and I think there's something about a communication strategy that we can get on board with and reach out a little bit more. Yeah, so I think it's definitely a worthy suggestion that we can take back as a wider team, is how do we promote the great work that we're doing? How do we get that message out? And how do we work closer with BID?
Thank you very much. I can see John remotely had a hand up for a moment, but let's take a few more questions in a bundle if we can.
Thanks. I think I might have a slightly different view to Sophia around the street count, but would take your advice. I think that I've also done the street count on 1 year, and it was fascinating, extremely interesting. And I know that we met a number of very different individuals, some who were really pleased to see people, those that were a bit ambivalent, didn't care whether anybody spoke to them or not, and others at the other end of the spectrum who were extremely aggressive and angry that they'd been disturbed. And so I'm very conscious of the resource and the planning that goes into street counts. I mean, it is a phenomenal amount of time and effort on everybody involved. So I think I would probably exercise caution in doing many more. I don't know, you will advise, I don't know whether quarterly is enough, because I don't know what else we would learn given how much knowledge the team already have on those that are in the street. So it's I guess I'm asking a value for money question. And the second really important point, I think, is of course there'll be members who will want to volunteer and do it again. But I am concerned about the safety of those volunteers. And so none of us could go out by ourselves. That would be really foolish. And would do how much or not? I mean, it's informative and helpful for members to see it working, but how helpful are we, or are we a hindrance to people trying to do the job on the street count? So I would just ask that question too.
Thank you, Helen. Any other questions? Great, Kirsty.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And I think we've we've gone full circle over the years about this. You know, and we try to take a balanced act. And I think if I think back 5 years ago, where the capacity sat with the outreach team, we were more inclined to do more thorough, robust counts. Obviously, over the last 5 years, our rough sleeping numbers have, you know, doubled, trebled. It's significant, you know, around approximately 800 a year. The capacity within the outreach team has only slightly increased. We are thinking smarter about when we have grant funding opportunity to enhance that team. So examples being a winter worker, where we know that's our busiest period. So we've got an additional worker that does that casework. We've got the tents and encampment outreach worker that works more closely within the partnership. We did consult with the outreach team, and it was a feeling across my team and them that there is definitely some benefit with us landing on a number that's more in line with what we're seeing within the annual number. We are still going to be using data, so some months there won't be a count, there won't be even a scaled back count. So we've considered it and we will trial it. And I think that's probably the best place to land for now, but I do appreciate what you're suggesting. And just to say, in regards to usefulness of members, I mean, I think from your perspective,
Extremely helpful.
Yeah.
So I had Deborah on my team, and her knowledge of the area was extremely helpful in the evening. So I would encourage.
And I think, Will, did you want to come in?
Thank
Can
you
I
very
just
much.
make one more point about the outreach team themselves, because although they are paid staff, I think we need to consider their well-being. And I know the person that I went around with spoke highly of how the company or the people they work for look after them, but I think it's a difficult job. I mean, I know I was jumping at times, so it's a difficult job.
Thank you very much, Will.
If I may, if it's helpful, there's a lively debate around the best way of doing this, I think, on this side of the table and on ours in previous months as well. And I think the relationship between the annual street count, and it is in the government's new local outcomes framework, so they are still wedded very much to an annual snapshot. The relationship between the snapshots of the audits that we do in between, I think, is really up to us. What do we want to gain from that number? What objective does it serve? So just a suggestion is, I think that we'll listen to your feedback. I think if we put a brief proposal together about what we would recommend as our approach to street counts going forward, and we can put this back to you, if that's okay.
Great. So perhaps at the next meeting, it doesn't have to be a detailed or substantial paper, but some ideas and options. Question, in terms of member engagement, maybe to consider how widely we advise members that they have the opportunity to join the count. John, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points in relation to some of the stuff that's been raised, and of course we are looking to procure a new outreach service, and a lot of the ideas that have come from both sides of the table are in the new service specification, so around what possibilities there are for the location of the service. Kirsty mentioned the commissioned service at the Dello Centre as well, but it's heartening actually to hear that a lot of the ideas are ones that we're taking forward in the new specification.
Well, thank you very much, John. Great. If members are content, I think we can move on to the next item, which is Will. That's a great, anyone watching this remotely, subcommittees have fewer decisions usually to take, but they often go a bit deeper into the issues so they can inform the grand committees that they work with. So I think we're seeing that today, both with the police report and that there's a good level of consideration. Anyway, we shouldn't be blowing our own trumpet a few weeks into the year. So Will, over to you for the next item.
Thank you, Chairman. So item 6, so this report provides members with a summary of current and near future priorities for the homelessness and rough sleeping team. The report is timed to mark the halfway point in the current homelessness and rough sleeping strategy and take into account independent evaluations and feedback on the statutory homelessness and rough sleeping services in recent months. The report considers changes to central government grant funding and opportunities created by the formation of the Ending Homelessness Accelerator programme, which will direct more grant funding into the North East London sub-region. The main part of the report sets out our current priorities as they stand for 26-27 and outlines potential interventions being considered for 2027-28 and beyond that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Will. Members, Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Well, this sort of has come up already, I suppose, but one of the issues for me is what work are we doing with the bids, and what is their response to us saying that maybe they could make a good contribution to our work. So that was one specific thing. The other thing I want to say is I think it's really good that you've done the appendix on temporary accommodation, because I think this subcommittee, while I've been on, probably hasn't sort of looked at this in any great detail. And obviously, in terms of homelessness, is one of the big issues, and I think we tend to concentrate on people living on the streets. But you know, there's a whole range of questions about, for me, about you know, I should know more than perhaps I do know about what our responsibilities are. I suppose what I'm getting at is, when are we actually exercising our legal responsibilities, and when are we going above that? And I think as a subcommittee, going forward, not necessarily today, we should be absolutely clear if we're making, firstly, that we're actually satisfying the legal responsibilities that we have, and secondly, if we're going beyond that, that we're actually making appropriate decisions either here or CCS, that's what we're doing. And I think this takes us some way, it took me some way to understand where we are. And there are some big issues. I know that London boroughs have exported their homeless temporary accommodation people way out of London, and so what I'm not clear about is where we are with that. And obviously the reason boroughs do that is because it's a lot cheaper for them to do that, and it can also export some of the issues that otherwise would come to some of the other services of the local authorities. So I think just being really clear about where we are with these issues, and whether we have policy that we're working to, or whether there's actually policy we need to develop going forward, I think would be good. So thanks for doing that, Wills.
Steve, can I bring in, I think Helen might have had a question.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm also really pleased, and I think probably we've talked about this before and felt that we all needed to get to a really good understanding on TA, and this does a lot to help that. I think I agree with the points that Steve's made, but in addition to that, I think the net cost of temporary accommodation at the city is just over £1 million per year. I know that we are looking, or about to look, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, at the allocations policy, social housing allocations policy. And I think there's a clear relationship between housing, social housing, housing sub, and this subcommittee, and to try and bring, a coherent lines between the two subcommittees, so that we're absolutely clear about what's in the art of the possible. Because I think, given the pressures that all city fund services are under, anything we can do to reduce that £1 million has got to be a good thing. And I think I'm not sure yet that we've got to the heart of what more can we do, but this is a really useful report setting out exactly what our current position is. The bit to follow is, and so what are we going to do about it?
Great. Thank you very much, Helen. And if I can just add a little kind of spin on the ball of one of those questions. I think it's great to think about our authorities and our capabilities, as we should. But in terms of the bids, I can see them as wonderful enablers, but I can also feel sometimes in governance terms they can be complicators. So, of course, we as members have our elected role, and bids can sometimes skew. And I'm thinking back to the police report where we balanced security and sensitivity. I just want to ensure that with bids we are achieving that balance. Oh, Helen.
Just to come back on that, you reminded me of something, Mark, thank you. I think that the bids and others from business come together in the Destination City Advisory Board. And I think that we have a real opportunity, because it may be anecdote and it may not be true today, but in the past, I think we've heard quite a few comments from businesses saying, can you please get these people away from our front door or from, you know, wherever it is. And it's not the welfare first model. Of course, it's how attractive or not do their premises look to people who are visiting and coming in. Completely different focus. But I'm not sure that we've, and forgive me if I've got this completely wrong, but I'm not sure we've had a really strong focused effort at presenting something to the bids, being clear about how they can contribute to our strategy. And that for me is just another bit of this story that I know you're mindful of, but we do need to move towards it. And we have, I think, got an opportunity to think about that in terms of broadening it just from CCS departments into more of the business world. And Destination City Advisory Board is a place where we can take some report.
Thank you, Helen. Well, over to.
Thank you. So perhaps if I pick up on the bid question first for both of you. So obviously, yes, of course, we see a role for the bids. I think it's fair to say we're not quite sure what that is or how to leverage it at this moment in time, but we are in conversations. I think certainly from my personal experience, my engagement with the bids has mostly been around discussion, engagement with them around the nature of rough sleeping and what it means for them, and giving them reassurance that we are tackling and how we tackle it. A lot of the content that Nikki's already covered. So I think there's definitely some more work to do there. We agree with that. In terms of that question about what is statutory, I mean, put most simply, the legislative instrument, the Housing Act, should cover rough sleeping. Frankly, evidence is that it falls short for lots of different and complex reasons. Hence why, beyond the statutory requirement to offer certain services, we do a host of other work that links to that. A previous question from this committee was how effective are we at making available our statutory offer to our rough sleepers? I think that's something we recognise we need to be better at. I was looking at some data before the meeting, and I think we had 29 applications last year from rough sleepers for statutory homelessness. So given that we see over 800 rough sleepers come through the city in a year, that number needs to be bigger. The service needs to change to reflect the capacity of the statutory service and the way it links in. So we're talking about system-wide change for us there. That's covered in the report and is something that we start looking at next year, maybe to affect change the year after that. But actually, we start sowing those seeds pretty much immediately, I think, with the grant funding that's coming in for next year. And how we use temporary accommodation, I mean, that's very much at the front of our minds. I think the acquisition of cheaper temporary accommodation and a better quality main duty housing offer, so how we discharge our homelessness applicants into new accommodation, are the two ways of improving that position. I think the latter is probably easier to do something about than the acquisition of cheaper temporary accommodation just at the moment. But I think both are fronts that we need to be working on. And again, that's also covered in the report. It's quite high level. The detail about how we actually tackle that isn't quite there yet, but it links very much to our statutory approach.
Great, thank you, Will. Helen.
Just to come back, because I think I agree with you, Will, and understand what you said. But I think just to come back to the bids, there is and Chris and I talked about this the other day, about if we look at the number of approaches over the 5-year period, you know, we've had an 87% increase. And I understand from what Chris has told me that that's not necessarily residents at all, it's workers and people fleeing domestic abuse, or, you know, perhaps other things too. And I mean, that seems to me to be something, you know, that number of approaches that may or may not end up in our service. They may be directed to a whole host of other things. I do appreciate that. And they may or may not end up being homeless. But nevertheless, it's another piece of data that if a large proportion of this 87% are workers in the city, then there's a question about the employer's responsibility for welfare and their workers, and whether there's an angle there that we've not really pursued yet. And I also realise that we don't want to open a floodgate and say, come to the city because we've got good responses. But on the other hand, we might be able to play it back to businesses in such a way as they consider that they may have a responsibility or an offer that they could contribute to this. Worth exploring, I think, is all I'm saying, really.
Thank you, Helen.
So the government's new strategy, I think, is unapologetically about prevention of homelessness, which makes very good logical sense, and the relief of homelessness for long-term rough sleepers. It's focusing very much on those two areas, and that makes a lot of sense. I think the question mark for the city, something that we've revisited many times, is what does prevention mean for us when a lot of our homelessness, particularly our rough sleeping, does not originate in the city, therefore is hard for us to prevent. However, the point you just made is a very good one, because what we have seen is that a big contributory factor to the increase in approaches is that these are approaches from people who have connections to the city in other ways, for example, through work. And that is something we might be able to develop a prevention work stream on. I agree.
Thank you very much, Will. Steve.
Yeah, just a specific. So it says in this report that we have 12 families in temporary accommodation. So I think 9 main duty and 3 relief duty or prevention duty. And I suppose, you know, I know that's relatively small compared with everywhere else, but I'd still, and you're also saying, I think, that they've been on average in temporary accommodation for 19 months. So I just think we as members need to know where these people are, what, given that they're in temporary accommodation, because whatever accommodation they're in a minute doesn't meet their needs, what sort of accommodation these people with young children are in. So I think something in the future that come to here would be a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
A brief reassurance about a couple of points. So we don't place families in B&B accommodation, which is something that some local authorities are pressed to have to do, I'm afraid, because of the sheer volume of applications. And we are still in the position where we are able to put the needs of all our applicants front and centre. So our placements into TA are always mindful of the needs of the individual. We rarely go more than 90 minutes away from where someone needs to be, and that's what our temporary accommodation allocations policy says. So we're not placing out of London most of the time, unless.
I just think it'd be good for us to have a little report about where these families
are.
Yeah,
there is I should have said there's a report scheduled for the next meeting in May, which is a summary of review of statutory homeless performance in the last year, and we will include it in that.
Great, thank you, Will and Steve, for May. Can I ask? I mean, the situation with outreach procurement is, I think, sort of developing and clarifying. Could we have a quick update before we move on to the next item?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to give that. So we did put a temporary pause on the outreach procurement just due to the uncertainties around the fair funding review and the impact it was having on the city fund. It does look, just some information that Chris has passed on to me today, that some of those questions have been answered, and I think we've been given a transitional protection in line with other local authorities on the fair funding review. So pending discussion with our executive director, I see no reason why we can't push on with that outreach procurement. The slight difficulty we have is the governance stages and getting them into the correct committees at the correct time. We have got a contingency plan in place to extend the current projects and contracts that will be affected by the procurement through next winter if needs be. But I will be bringing a normal commission update report to the next subcommittee, and I very much hope that the stage 1 report for information will be accompanying that next time. But as far as I can tell, and it is new news to me, we're okay, we're good to go again.
Great. And just for some context, a paper was due here for information, but procurement sub had to pull it a couple of weeks ago, and CNCS likewise. But the transitional arrangement, which we understand is flowing, is 3 years of transitional funding for the corporation from the ministry, which will in turn give us that comfort to keep this as a priority. But we have the chair of CNCS, Community and Children's Services, with us, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand, why the chair of projects and procurement might have raised questions and therefore the paper was pulled. I think so from our perspective, I can't envisage any time in our range of services for homeless sleeping where we would not want to go to outreach. I mean, for me, it's just a no-brainer. And I do appreciate that if there was a problem in the contract and the way it's been formed in the past, we can't reduce the investment. It would have to be underwritten in some way. We can increase it, but we can't reduce it. And so it strikes me that given the increase in the numbers we've had, and given up all of the things we've been saying today about the importance of these services, there isn't a way in which the city can operate, in my mind, any kind of HRS without a really robust outreach service. And so, and I understand what I'm saying in terms of city fund pressures on CCS, like any other city funded department, they will be there. But this feels to me to be so fundamentally important to this service area that there just isn't a way in which we can't move forward on it. So I think, John, I have talked to Judith a bit about this, and I think the sooner that can get back into projects and procurement in whatever form of words they find acceptable would be helpful. If you could let me have a date when you have one, because I have talked briefly to the chair of projects and procurement, but we've agreed that we'll talk again in more detail to just try and make sure that we all understand the relevance and the importance. I think the other point I wanted to say is I think one of the challenges was about statutory responsibility. And there's, I think, as I understand, we have to have a service, but what that service looks like is not prescribed. So it's for us to determine, and I think our determination is that this is the front end, and there's, whether it's outreach is set out in any kind of statute or not, it is the way in which we deliver our statutory responsibility, and that's the point I think needs to be made fairly firmly to projects and procurement. So,
and there's member consensus, I think, left, right and centre on this. There was a moment at which we felt ministry funding was in doubt potentially, but it's been secured for 3 years. And I think there is a consensus politically across the corporation. So hopefully we'll proceed without any hiccups. Members, anything else on this item before we move on? Oh, sorry, John, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say, I'm hoping to redo a commissioning timeline at the end of the week. My colleague from Commercial Services isn't at work at the moment, but I don't see why I can't do that without them. So I should be able to share something next week, and I'll send that via the clerk.
Thank you very much, John. Right, moving on to item 7, which is with Will.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report provides members with a summary of progress against the aims set out in the current homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. The report usually covers 2 sections, the strategy delivery plan and the performance scorecard. Sorry, it does cover 2 sections. Q2 data was unavailable in time for the October meeting, so this report in today's pack covers Q2 and Q3. In the strategy delivery plan, 53 actions have now commenced and 29 actions are completed, which is 3 more in the last period, although no new actions have been added in this period. And a summary of those completed actions can be found at Appendix 1.
Thank you very much, Will. Members, any questions? Well, I mentioned we discuss as well as take decisions from time to time, but this time we will just pass on to the next item, which is questions relating to work of the subcommittee. Town Clerk, do we have any?
I have not received any questions in advance.
Members, do you have any? Great. In that case, we'll move on to the final item of public business, which is any matters I consider urgent. It's not really urgent, but a couple of meetings back, we discussed the possibility of an event, and I think officers have framed up an interesting plan for us to sort of hear about now. So, Will, Chris, whoever.
Thank you, Chairman. So Simon Cribbins and I met with an organisation some of you may know is the Centre for Homelessness Impact. So they're quite an important player nowadays in the homelessness landscape. They consult with central government sub-regionally, and they're very much one of the architects behind the new Ending Homelessness Accelerator programme. So for us, they're effectively a think tank. That's probably the best way of describing them. And we've been talking to Homeless Think about how they can help frame and facilitate a discussion for senior officers and members and selected other partners and stakeholders to reflect on the work that we're doing around homelessness and rough sleeping, thinking about that in terms of the lifespan of the current strategy. So taking this kind of midpoint, thinking about reflecting on its progress to date, what can be done in the remaining portion of it, although lots of funds will already be committed for 26-27. So maybe think about thinking more realistically about the direction of travel for 27-28, think about that in terms of the government's new plan to end homelessness, the priorities that we've already mentioned around that, and we're looking to do something in probably May. So that's where we are to this point.
And I guess members of the subcommittee will get invited, but members of CNCS, I would have thought as well.
Yes.
Marvellous, thank you. Members, do you have any questions about the event? Helen?
I don't think it's a question. I'd just say that I'm absolutely wholeheartedly for this. I think it would be extremely helpful to us. And one of the reasons I say that is that those who were at the CCS dinner last year will have heard the chief executive of this organisation speak. And it's one of the best dinner speeches I've ever heard. I thought she was excellent. And I think she brings that excellence to the proposal that she's planning to offer for us. I think I'm even more attracted to, because I think that she's not going to charge us anything for it. So that's even more helpful. But I think she was, just the way in which this organisation thinks would be so useful to us to explore where we are and where we want to be and what more we need to do to get there. I think would be really excellent.
So useful to showcase, positive activity. We should perhaps think, as you suggested earlier, who else can we bring in, whether it's external ministry, perhaps Rachel Blake. We could look at a wider community, because this seems like a really central point to get across. So thank you very much, Will and team. Town Clerk, exclusion.
Thank you. Yes, so item 10, exclusion of the public. Do members agree to exclude the public for the remaining items of business? Thank you. I'll just wait a moment while I end the live stream. Thank you.
Right, members, thank you very much.